we'll continue with Robert Zell. Give him a warm round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I realize this is the last talk, so I really appreciate everybody coming out and joining this today. This is techniques and tools for becoming an intelligence operator. Just to clarify, it's operator, not officer, so this is not a military overview or anything like that. And intelligence will be focused more on the open source intelligence rather than the covert side of it. That's my contact information, so if you want to email me with any suggestions, greatly appreciated. What can you expect from this talk? So this is kind of a summary and agenda of what I'm going to go through. Some areas will go a little bit deeper than others, just because of my time limitations. I could spend an hour, I think, on any one of these areas. If you've got questions and you want to talk to me afterwards about any of these areas, please let me know. Near the end, I'm going to use some real-world examples from my work, which are going to show you kind of how we use some of these techniques. And then at the very end, I'll wrap up with kind of an ethical overview of some of this work as well. A little bit about me really quickly. I'm the founder and president of Trace Labs, which is a nonprofit organization that crowdsources open source intelligence to find missing persons. That's one of my roles. I also work in IT for a large aerospace company. That also keeps me very busy. And I'm also a volunteer for about a decade with Coquitlam Search and Rescue, where I act as a tracker. And it's kind of relative because being a tracker out in the woods is very similar, actually, to doing intelligence in many ways. So if you get lost in Canada, I might be the one looking for you. So there you go. And I placed third in the SC CTF at DEF CON in 2017 and 2018. And that's my Twitter and my email if you want to contact me. All right, the standard disclaimer. So none of the things I say here today reflect any employer, either past, present, or future. A little bit about the source of knowledge. So I'll be speaking on various subjects of intelligence now, and a lot of that has come to me through my experience with Trace Labs. Trace Labs is a nonprofit organization that crowdsources open source intelligence. So I get to see dozens of operations per year with thousands of contestants, and all those contestants are generating hundreds of thousands of submissions, and I get to see that stream come in. So I get to see what works, what doesn't work, the techniques, how they pivot from information to information, and all of those things. So what I'm really trying to do here today is to summarize a lot of that information and then give it to you so you can see, based off of all of that experience, what's effective and what's not. Who you might be. So I've really tried to tailor this talk to a few different profiles here. Anybody that's interested in any sort of investigation, open source intelligence enthusiasts of any level, a red team, pen testers, especially if you're doing physical pen testing, this could be helpful for you. And anybody that's into the digital forensics that wants to get a little bit better at conducting research. Open source intelligence, most of you already know what this is, but I find that I need to explain it quite often to people. I'm really bad at explaining this because usually when I talk about it, people go, oh yeah, that's easy, you just Google it, right? But it is a little more difficult than that. It's open, so it's not covert. You know, it's information that you can find that's not behind a paywall that you should be able to locate, but often you need a special skill set to be able to take bits of information and add it together to then create this actionable intel report that really is your end product that you want to come away with. So hopefully I've explained it better in those details, because it's freely available but often difficult to find. The landscape of open source intelligence, you can see from this, is vast, right? There's all these different social media platforms you can go to. It's getting bigger every day. I learn of a new tool, of a new site every day. It's also becoming a little bit more refined as well, as we've seen with areas like Facebook, right? It used to be the go-to area. It was much more open, and that's changed over time, right? So our procedures and our techniques also need to change to adapt to that changing landscape. Before I get into techniques, one of the first things I like to talk about is OPSEC. You can see from the expression of these kids' faces, that's often what we see when people first start off on an operation. They're very excited, they want to jump right into it, and that's probably fine if you're doing a CTF with Trace Labs, because it's a very low risk, but I would recommend that as you get into this, that you generate good OPSEC. If you want to continue in your career to start doing more risky operations, it's very good to get that discipline in place, because I can tell you that the targets that you could be looking for in the future will not be as excited about your reconnaissance as you are. So it's good to get that down, and I'm going to go into that a little bit. The first step, of course, would be to take a look at profiles that you may want to create. We call them sometimes sock puppets. I'm not advocating that you violate any terms of service with any social media platforms. However, this may be something that you might want to get into and take a look at. It takes some time to develop these profiles. It's a lot of care and feeding. If you have kids, it's a very similar sort of process. You're developing these entities. So you need to consider things like the style of the entity that you're creating, what platforms you're going to create it on, and then kind of proceed very carefully with that. It's not a necessity to do this. If you're familiar with the different platforms like LinkedIn, there's settings on LinkedIn where you can say you can't see me when I look at your profile, and likewise I can't see you when you look at mine. But there's other platforms where if I look at your profile so many times, it's going to recommend that we become friends. So you need to be familiar with at least the platforms if you're not going to go down this road. If you do go down this road, there are some things you want to think about. I put a lot of links in this presentation so you can take pictures of it, because I can't get into every single little tool, and there's a new tool every day. But when you're creating your sock puppets or your profiles, you want to think about the personalities and the entities that you're creating. Not only do you want to be careful as you create them, but you also want to think about making sure that it's consistent. So area code, how you create them. Some people say don't use a VPN. You want to use public Wi-Fi to do that. And then there's also all sorts of tools that you can then utilize to create that entity. They'll generate names for you if you're not creative, and also the full-blown identity if you want. So yeah, it's quite useful for that. The VPN, of course, probably everybody in the room here uses VPN. If you don't, it's Black Friday. Do we do Black Friday here? Is that a thing? Yeah, okay. So you'll never get a better deal throughout the whole year probably to get a VPN. You can buy bundles, which is even cheaper. It's a slightly different use case, right? So we're always worried about data in transit encryption, but this is for doing investigations. It's quite nice to be able to travel without traveling, right? So to be able to be viewed as if you're in a different location. So that's one of the reasons you'd want it for this. Also to bypass some geographical restrictions on some sites is also very useful. Those are some of the VPNs that people use. Typically, I like Proton VPN, but use whatever works for you. They're all pretty similar. Once you get that dialed in, the next step really is to take a look at what operating system you're going to use for your operations. A lot of people will come out and they'll just use a basic Windows system or a Linux setup. Whatever works for you is fine. However, I would recommend a couple things. Don't use your work computer for this, and then also you may want to have it all set up and ready to go when you come in, and I'm going to go through that a little bit as well. The other option is Tails. Some people, you come into the CTF or they're doing an operation with something like Tails. Very cool, very interesting. However, I've seen a lot of technical issues with that, and if you're showing up and you're getting paid for an operation, you don't want to have to spend time making things work. You want to go right into your job, right? Buscador by Intel Techniques, Michael Bazell, he actually wrote the book on this sort of stuff, so I can't say enough good things about him. Some of the tools I've noticed in that distro are aging. It's still quite good. Kali Linux, really the go-to platform for this sort of stuff. Many of you are probably already using it. Trace Labs, which I'm involved in, is we're going to actually release a distro in partnership with Offensive Security, which we're hoping to get released early next year with all the tools configured. So if you're into that sort of thing, if you're looking for a distro that can do that sort of work and you want to provide input, let me know. I'd be happy to work with you on that. Configuration, so I highly recommend anything that you're doing in this space, you probably want to have a virtualized instance so that you can archive that and have a different setup for each operation. This is beneficial for a number of different reasons. One, you're not going to cross-pollute. You're also going to be able to archive very well. What I would recommend is you have a fully set up virtual instance. Pick whatever flavor you want. VirtualBox is free, readily available. have it fully configured with all of your stuff, your reconnaissance apps, Maltego, ReconNG. Get your administrative apps, which a lot of people forget about. So if you're using Hunchly or something similar to help you with your organization, your plugins on your browser, another thing people often forget about. There's a great link there to a bunch of different plugins that you can look at. There's a new one every day. And then, of course, if you're doing your sock puppets or your password managers or anything like that, that may not be on the image, but you need to have that set up. And then, of course, your VPN set up. When you're coming into a paid engagement, nobody wants to pay you to set that stuff up, right? They expect you to come in and start working. Same thing with a CTF, right, that we do. You should be able to come in and just start going, right? You don't want to waste hours with setup. That gets us into mission planning. Your objectives. Very important to understand what you're actually about to do. I've been in many executive offices where you go in and they say, okay, go do this. And you kind of think you know what you're about to do. You leave the office and then you realize, oh, darn it, yeah, I forgot. I should have asked this. So these are some questions that you might want to think about before you leave that first meeting with the client. And we're talking about, okay, what are we actually going to be doing here? What are the desired objectives? What are you supposed to be achieving? What data points are important and what's not important, right? What do they want to see in that end report? What does done look like is a really good question. What do they want to see as an end result? What's nice to have and what's essential? So you may not find exactly what they're looking for, but to be able to find some stuff that's actually very helpful is probably good to know, right? Risk. So if you're in an engagement where you're actually looking maybe for criminals or other things where there's an element of risk, these are some excellent questions also to ask, right? So the pillars of project management, budget, schedule, resourcing, those are good things to know for any of your engagements, right? What's that going to look like? How long do you have to complete your operation? So typically these are very time sensitive, so you probably don't have a lot of time. Is the target expecting you? So that's where OPSEC comes in. If they're a sophisticated target, you're going to have some things to consider there. Are you the only one conducting operations on the target? So with the CTF, you're going to have multiple parties all looking at the same person. That's something to think about. If you're working with a team, especially new people, there's things like NDAs that you need to consider. And what action would shut down operations? So there's some risk there that you could do stuff that would then put the whole operation in jeopardy. That could be maybe the target finds out that you're looking for them or anything like that. Data breach, things like that you want to be careful of. Then retribution, especially if you are doing OSINT operations on any sort of criminal actors or things like that. You don't want them to know who you are when you're doing this. So definitely some factors to consider there. Finally, actionable intel. So this is really the whole reason why you would be doing intelligence operations, right? Is because you want to then provide your employer or whoever it is with a report that provides them with something that they can then action, right? A bunch of data is not that helpful. So we usually provide an actionable intel report with a very brief summary and some key points. Knowing what that actionable intel is really important. So that's something you probably want to talk about. How you're preserving the data, how you're transmitting the data, how you're going to categorize it, what's important to be able to show in that report, how you're going to share the report, how you're going to safeguard the report. Those are all things to really consider. Finally then, what's success look like? That's also good to know, right? Who's going to be actually judging your success? Is it the person you're reporting to? Is it somebody above that person? Do you have to go through different stages in the project? What does it mean to get to the next stage? What do you need to do? Usually there's gates in projects. What gets you through that next gate is very important. KPIs, milestones usually are an important thing. What's your operational period? So usually for an intelligence operation, it'll be a short time frame. And so your operational periods may just be nonstop, right? Probably there may not be breaks. Maybe there is shifts. And then again, the limits. What's limiting your effort here? Is it money, people, time, schedule? That sort of stuff's good to know. All right, so then we're done asking all those questions. Now we're into actually a new set of questions, but now we're actually doing target acquisition. So now we're kind of ready to get out of the gate finally, and the first step here is level set. So again, we're kind of stepping back for a second before we jump in, and we're thinking about the target. Do we have a unique identifier? Usually we do. Usually we have maybe a name, a company name, an individual name, maybe a username, maybe a phone number, something, right? Usually it's spelt wrong. I can't count how many times I've got information and it's wrong. And you go down a path and then you realize, oh, there was 2 I's or there was no A. So just verifying and assuming that data is wrong initially will usually help you avoid those sort of mistakes. Usually I'll look at acquaintances or what the situation or circumstance around what you're doing. So is the person lost or missing? Is it a criminal? Is it, what's going on that can help you quite a bit, right? Stationary or mobile, not necessarily one being more difficult than the other, but knowing the difference will help you as well as you proceed. And then of course lifestyle. All of those things are going to help you to be able to focus on particular areas. Geography and mobility, are they actually mobile? What's their, are they limited to a certain area, a country probably, or a city is going to help you quite a bit. A lot of tools are very specific to geography. And then of course description. I'm more focusing on the unique identifiers when I look at description. So do they have a tattoo, for example? If you're going to look at human trafficking, especially prostitution, where people have been brought in, put on drugs, put into prostitution, and then are human trafficked. They'll blur out the faces, but you can usually identify them with different tattoos and body markings. Sophistication of the target, so the higher the sophistication, the more you really need to consider your OPSEC. Situational awareness and risk, so very similar to that, right? Are the targets aware of the situation of what's going on? And that increases the risk to you, of course. And then what information is not being shared with you? So whenever you have this sort of exercise, most exercises, you're not getting all the information. So understanding that and being able to proceed with that understanding that there's a gap in what you know, and then being able to kind of predict what that's going to be as you move forward is going to be something that can help you actually quite a bit. You've done that level set, now we're ready to do an initial sweep. We've got maybe real names, usernames, we've got some nicknames maybe, start looking at good or useful friends or family. That's actually quite helpful. If it's a sophisticated target, they're not going to come up very quickly, but their friends and family quite often will, right? So people often say, oh, I'm off Facebook. It's like, yeah, but your friends and family aren't, and they're taking pictures of you, so you're still on there. Abandoned accounts are quite nice. They can often give you quite a bit of information. Criminal records, I love criminal records because not only can I tell the nature of the person and the risk level, but it'll tell me where they've gone to court, where they're going to show up next, and their aliases, which are golden, because I'll find tons of social media usually under their aliases. Patterns of life is a big one. So are they traveling? Do they go to the gym? Do they smoke, drugs, drink? Right, whatever. All of those things are going to give me new paths, new streams of data. Assets and revenue streams, probably the #1 thing that I would look at is revenue streams. So you need money to survive. Where are you getting the money from, right? So the other, about a month ago, we had one where the person had a website that was generating ad revenue, and that was of extreme interest because people don't leave money on the table usually, right? So they're probably going to be collecting that money. Passions and fears, what are they scared of? What do they really like? That again can give you some insights into their pattern of life and how they're going to behave, which can help you as well. The basics, so we're going to get into tools now a little bit. These are the things that I would recommend you take time to know if you don't already, if you're going to get into this sort of work. Multigo, it's really the go-to tool for being able to quickly do things and show it in a nice graphical representation. I love to take some screenshots and put that into my report from Multigo. It doesn't do everything for you, of course, but it's quite nice. Recon NG as well, the Harvester, Shodan, of course, great tools. And then Google Dorking. So just being able to do some basic Google Dorking is going to help you quite a bit. Have a go-to sheet of maybe 10 or 20 commands that you have in there that you can use whenever you need to. Is going to help you quite a bit. Google's great. I mean, not only can it give you historic data, but it's great just to use like this. Now we're going to get into some techniques. Real names. This is the most common starting point, right? Somebody will give you a name. They'll say, hey, go look for Joe. Okay. Is it spelled correctly? Probably not. Middle initial, are they using that? Middle name. Just start with low-hanging fruit. Google searching, LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. and I'll talk about that more, but I go there all the time and have great success. Begin building that profile, right, of friends, where they live. All of these are going to turn into unique data streams for you that you're going to go down. And then the next step you're going to start working towards is email addresses, usernames, and pictures. Those are usually what I see as go-to areas to get more information. LinkedIn. Love LinkedIn. I have a lot of success with LinkedIn for multiple reasons, especially with companies or people that are working with a company. It'll tell me all the positions. It'll tell me people that are close to each other. It'll tell me who the more social butterflies are. Quite often they will post all of their other social media there as well. So it's like a go-to shop for everything. If you send me a LinkedIn request, I will accept it, just because it gives me more reach in LinkedIn. If you don't have a lot of connections in LinkedIn, you can use this tool, LinkedIn X-Ray. It kind of helps you bypass some of the limitations of a free account, which is quite nice. Some techniques for usernames. So if you get a username, that greatly accelerates your investigation, because quite often we have the password reuse issue. We also have username reuse issues, right? So it's going to be reused across multiple platforms, which is excellent. But you have to make sure that you're getting it correctly, and sometimes people will actually change their username quite often. Like your work one might be first name dot last name. You're probably not going to use that on Facebook necessarily and stuff like that. So that's something you want to take a look at. Some tools for checking this. Some of these are geographically specific, but I think these will work here as well. You can plug in the username if you've got one. It'll show you where that's used in other social networks, and you can just very conveniently just click the link, and that all those will pop up. And you can go through that actually quite quickly, and it'll show you the picture. It's like, yes, that's my person. So I really like doing that. It's a little faster. Some techniques for email. So once you've got your real name, then you've got your username, and now I'm going to pivot to email, because quite often my username is going to be the prefix on the email. Some simple tools that you can use for validating if you've got a correct email address or not. You can use email-format, browse the entire domain, and then just start Googling as well. I should have probably put that at the very top, but Google and Bing, because sometimes they're slightly different, will often give you instant results on emails as well. And then these are more US based, and even then, like, Pipple has been kind of it's not as effective as it used to be. A lot of these tools recently over the last year have really taken a big hit. Same time Michael Bazel's tools came off his public website, these all changed a little bit as well. So your mileage may vary, but definitely worth trying them out, because they used to be the go-to place to get a lot of quick hits. Having said that, these are still golden, right? I go to these all day long. If I have your email address and I want to know more, I'll go to these. Have I been pwned is great, because I'll plug in your email address. It'll tell me where you have other social media accounts. You may not still use them, but you did at some point. You could then, of course, get the breach data as well, and you'll get even more stuff from that, but I'm not advocating that. But this here is quite useful, these links. TikTok, if you have kids, they're probably on TikTok right now. I don't know how popular it is over here, but in North America, it's crazy popular. My coworkers are showing me TikTok videos of their kids all day long. So it doesn't have a lot of native tools, but there's these third-party tools that you can use for hashtag searches and downloading the videos and things like that. If you want to get into TikTok a little bit more, which I would recommend because it is just gaining popularity very quickly, there's an excellent article here with Intel Techniques, Michael Bazel again. His blog is wonderful for this sort of stuff. His book, his blog, everything. So I'm a bit of a Michael Bazel fanboy for sure there. Facebook, less useful than it used to be, of course. They've done a lot of changes here. Typically when I go to Facebook, it's fairly easy to find the target. What I want to then do is some correlation between friends. So maybe I have a couple people I'm interested in. I want to see what friends they're sharing. So this second link there will give you that. So then Twitter, love Twitter. Twitter is actually quite useful. Again, not a lot of native tools, but there are some very handy third-party tools that you can use. The last one there in particular, I like it because if they've deleted some stuff, Google will usually retain it, and it's excellent for going through that. Each link will be a separate page with the tweet. There's a bunch of other tools as well, but these are the kind of the go-to ones that I like. Brings us into Instagram. So again, Instagram, people do very well with Instagram when they're doing OSINT, and these are some of the key tools. Again, there's new ones every day. You know, it's very handy, I find. Snapchat. Snapchat's, I don't use it a lot. A lot of people do. I've had limited success with this. I do like the built-in map functionality on that, so it'll show you the location and where those are happening. That's quite handy, I find. You can search by username on the first link there, but I've had limited success with that. I really like mapping tools, which I'm going to get into next. Geolocation. So this one I really like. The reason I like it is because I can basically set up the area that I want. So let's say I want this block, and then I say, okay, now I've got the area. I've limited to that. Now I want to set the date and time that I want to search for stuff. So let's start from the beginning of the conference to the end of the conference. And then I want, let's say, Facebook, Twitter, you know, Instagram, and whatever else, right? And then I get all this stuff on the map, which is very nice, right? It's a very nice way to do it. And you can click and go through it and look at that stuff, which is very nice. A lot of the agencies in North America, and I think quite a bit over here, use EchoSec, very popular tool. ArcGIS is very similar in design and functionality, but it's used more on the emergency management side of things, so not as well known in our industry. You can get a free trial of it, and usually your engagements might not be more than 21 days, so that might work out quite well. It's a bit of a learning curve to set it up, but it works great. So I've used it a few times, highly recommend it. Not sure which one's better, so if you've used both and you have a preference, let me know, because I'd be very curious to understand that. Both are great tools. A lot of people think that if they delete stuff, then it's gone forever off the internet, but we know that's not always true. So these are some great tools that you can look at to find that data that they've deleted. And if you have a sophisticated target, they will do that, right? They'll go through and delete all their stuff or try to. So you often have to go back and look at stuff, and that's actually quite helpful, I find. Wayback Machine's quite popular. Now we get into target types. Mobile targets. And if you're looking for criminals in your job, this can be, of course, very handy. They'll be mobile. And when I look at this, when I'm traveling, most of those things I'm doing, right? So I'm in all those things. Sometimes I'm leaving comments with our organization, Trace Labs. We've been quite successful with that, and so people have left comments in things like Airbnb. It's not uncommon. You probably know their username already. You might know their email address, so you're going to be able to find that fairly quickly, and that would perhaps tell you exactly where they are. So quite handy that way. Physical infrastructure. So these are some nice links. YouTube, it's surprising how many offices have tours of their office on YouTube, which you can then slow down and pick up CCTV. You can pick up their card access. You can pick up all these things, right? Typically what I will look at, if you're going to do like a social engineering engagement or physical pen testing, I'll look at, of course, access, roof access, HVAC, ID cards, parking, food delivery, all those sort of things, which you can get from Google Street View and stuff like that. Technical infrastructure, many of you are probably familiar with most of these links. They're very handy. You can pull up, you know, DNS registration or website registration and get lots of information. One of my favorites at the very bottom there is wiggle.net. So that'll give you the SSID if it's publicly available. So you can, if you're doing, say, a social media engagement, or social engineering engagement rather, you can tell them what their SSID is for their Wi-Fi, and it instantly gives you some level of credibility. It's very nice. Corporate, so finding a corporate databases where you can get information. That one's, first one's US, second one's more global. But these are very simple links in the middle there, right? So no big surprises there. However, it's surprising what you will find on there. Things like Glassdoor with job descriptions from executives, which will have their private information. There's a lot of information in there that you can collect. Setting up alerts to feed you information if you're doing a longer term engagement can be very beneficial as well. Now we're going to get into some examples. So I've got three real-world examples here to go through. This first one was a girl that went missing in Victoria. Initially we found forum with her real name, talking about her cat. And from real name we got to username. From username we got to email address. From email address we got into the forums where she started talking about the trip that she was going on. And then we found out that she had a boyfriend, found her boyfriend on Facebook, found her boyfriend had a criminal record, and then from the criminal record found the aliases. There were 6 actually aliases. So that got very concerning very quickly, escalated very quickly, and then the subject was located safe. So it was a good story, good ending. However, it could have gone very, very wrong, right? So the lesson from that is really, if you can't find a lot of information on the subject, in this case we did find a little bit right away. Her partner provided us with a ton of information, right, because of that criminal record and all those aliases. So it definitely shows you to look at the peripheral as well. Second one, girls reported missing in Vancouver. Lots of social media, bad situation, extensive drug use, couch surfing, doesn't really have a solid home life, escalating in her partying, going to more and more risky type of places with people. This was a bad news because it ended very poorly. And it really shows you how these investigations, this type of work is usually very time sensitive, right? You may have a very small amount of time, so you really need to show up to the job ready to go, right? So all your questions answered, all your kit ready, so that's really important. Third situation, husband and father goes missing in Toronto. With this one, it was very interesting because, you know, we have password reuse, we have username reuse. Well, there's also picture reuse, right? So in this case, this person thought, well, I'll just use my same old pictures, right? I've changed my name, I've changed all my other stuff, but I'll just use my same old picture, right? Well, of course, there's a lot of great tools out there that will help you identify that, and that was very quickly identified. And it appears this person was recreating a new life to avoid some child support. But so that was really interesting. So pictures, that's why I like them so much, is they can be very, very handy to find what you're looking for. Target evasion. So sophisticated targets can really be aware that you're going to be looking for them. We had one that had prepared to disappear 2 years in advance. So they had worked for 2 years to delete their trail. That was a child abduction case. So they can spend a lot of time on this and do some really good work to stop you from finding them, right? So some evasion tactics, right? They abandon their accounts, or sometimes they don't get rid of everything. Fake data, that takes a lot of work, but we've seen some of that as well on identity theft and stuff like that. That was really interesting. Aliases, of course, if you can find criminal records, you can usually find aliases. Trying to live unplugged, not on the internet as much, very hard to do, right? And then sometimes they will even set up some alerts to trigger if people are actually looking for them, right? So that's quite a bit more sophisticated, but we do see that. So that finally leads me into the ethical component of that as I wrap up. And I've quickly gone through a bunch of stuff here at a very high level that kind of shows you some of the things that you can do to bring information up on people or companies. And you all have a trail out there as well, right? So there's lots of details about all of you, even though we're in the industry, we're security conscious. So what I would recommend is take a look at what's out there for you if you haven't recently, for your family, for your company, right? It's pretty scary when you see that. And this is going to be used more and more. This is not something where, oh, it's just me doing it with Trace Labs. It's really going to be utilized more and more by different companies when they're doing, if you apply for a job, if you're like, there's so many examples, right? People come to me now when they're renting their apartment, and I do a quick reconnaissance on the people that are going to rent their flat, right? So that's happening every day. And there's many, many more examples, right? So it's very good to be kind of conscious and aware of what your footprint looks like out there. Definitely recommend that. All right, so that's it. Any questions? Thank you.
Yeah, we have a good 5 minutes for questions, so you don't have to state your names.
Yes.
How hard is it to get access to criminal record? Because in a lot of countries it's not public.
Yeah, in some countries much more difficult than others. In Canada, it's very easy for me to identify if somebody has a criminal record. I can not only see, and a lot of people are not necessarily aware of this. So, and I wasn't years ago that I could just go find that. It's not publicized, but in a lot of countries, including Canada, you can. I can go find what you've been convicted of, when you're going to show up in court, what your aliases are according to the police. Yeah, quite a bit of information actually. It's quite scary. I didn't expect that to be as public as it was. So, yeah.
Further questions? Anyone? No? I have a question.
Yes.
How does GDPR affect your ability to collect OSINT?
Yeah, yeah. So if there's any GDPR experts here that would like to work with us as we expand into Europe, I'd love to work with them because we're being very careful as we get into these countries because we are global. And some of the things that we do is we have a very strict scope on what we do, right? So we don't share our data with anybody but law enforcement. And once we've given law enforcement the data, then we've deleted all the data from our platform and everywhere else. So we're not holding onto the data for any other purpose. So that's one of the things we do to safeguard it. We often have families that come to us and say, hey, can we have the data? And we have to say no. We say go to the law enforcement because we're not law enforcement. We're only acting on their behalf. So we do that. So we try to comply as much as we can with any sort of regional laws that way. But yeah, we have to proceed very carefully with all of that. So yeah.
Hi, how do you proceed with vetting of information? If, for instance, if you have some information and you're not sure is it credible or not?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. That was something we were very worried about at the very beginning. So what we do is we don't care who the people are. So any contestants that come in, we don't look at who they are. We don't need to know who their true identity is. We only care about the data. So the data that comes in, how do we know that it's legitimate? We have, unlike a theoretical CTF where there's only one known answer and that's either right or wrong, we don't know what the answer is going to be. We don't know what data you're going to give us. So we have to have virtual people, virtual admins that are looking at the data as it comes in. So when you give us the data, you give us the category, you give us the actual data, so maybe it's the person's phone number, and then you give us a link to where you found it. So those 3 bits of information would be in your submission. So the admin in the system, they may be in some other country, they will click the link and they will validate where you got it from, and then we will take that and put it into the report. So the phone number might be wrong, but we can at least validate that your submission is authentic, that you found that what looks like their phone number. And then once we get so many submissions of the same thing, we can start to build the probability that is correct, right? So if 5 people submit that same phone number from different areas, then it's quite probable that that's correct. So we can have a probability statement in there as well. So yeah, that's how we do that.
So you do this for all steps in your intelligence gathering and so forth? Or just the initial submission?
Yeah, so every submission within the TraceLab CTF is the same sort of thing. It's much like a typical CTF where you've got that Jeopardy board of categories from easy to more difficult. You get more points for the more difficult, lower points for easier. And your submission would be category. So is it maybe advanced or maybe it's easy. And then also the link to where you found the data. So it's open source intelligence. So there's got to be a link to be able to get to it. It can't be behind a paywall. It can't be private. It's got to be something we can click a link and see it. And then, of course, any sort of description that you want to put in there as well, you can put there. So, yeah. So we can always validate the data. Yeah.
Okay. No more questions? Okay. Then thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and before we do the closing ceremony, we'll wait for a moment so all the others can join from the other room.